Thank you very much to Jeffrey Ogley for inviting me. We are very excited being here. My name is David Burgos. I am the head of the multicultural practice at Millward Brown, the research company. And we just are going to release a new book on marketing to the new majority. So I'm very happy that I've been hearing all the discussions that we had in the morning. And I think that we are very much in line in our thinking, so I'm very excited about that. I think we are living in a great time in the US, a time of change and a time of opportunity. So I think that by being here, by listening to these people talk, I think we are getting very well prepared for the future that is actually now. So I'm very excited about this opportunity. In the morning, we have talked a lot about the new mainstream being the new mainstream being multicultural. We saw a lot of the numbers, the statistics. So I'm not going to go into that at this point, because I think that at this point everybody knows this. So what I wanted to focus on is in the so what, how we. What we do next with these numbers, how we apply this to our marketing, our day-to-day life. I know that I have kind of more than 1 hour to talk, and you just had lunch, so I don't want to get you asleep. So I was planning, why don't we do this as a conversation? If you, at any point you have questions, just raise your hand. We can make this a conversation similar to what we did in the previous panels. I know that I'm the only panelist here, so it's kind of more harder to do it, but let's do this a conversation, and that way you also don't get tired with my accent either. I know it can be tricky sometimes. If you don't understand me, just raise your hand and I'll repeat it in Spanish too. Okay, so what? To do that, I first wanted to go through 5 facts that I think are also very important to understand when we talk about the new majority, about the new mainstream. Because these facts are not always similar to the psychographic questions that we were discussing in the morning. These facts are not that evident in the day-to-day conversations that we have. We always focus on the numbers only, but we don't talk much about this. But I think that these topics are very important in terms of how marketing is evolving in the US. So I'm going to go through these 5 facts. The first one is that ethnic consumers do not live in silos. They interact with the mainstream. They interact among each other. And we see that everywhere, in many aspects of life. We just had Mexican food with Japanese, with some Italian. Food is a great thing in terms of mixing of cultures, music, entertainment, a lot. You are here in New York. I don't have to sell this idea to you. Just walk out in the street and you see that everywhere. But it is a very important factor. And to me, for example, this is a big differentiating point between what we call multicultural marketing and international marketing, that we also touched a little bit in the morning. When you talk about international marketing, yes, you are talking about different cultures that live in different parts of the world. They don't necessarily are in contact, although now they are with technology and everything, but still, I know, people in Bolivia doesn't care much about what people in Jordan is doing, and vice versa. In our case, in the US, that is not the case. We are all in this together: Hispanics, African Americans, whites, Asians, Muslims, everybody. Whatever we do with one segment can impact what we do with these other segments as well. And most importantly, this interconnection between cultures influences each other. If you compare Mexicans in the US, I'm pretty sure that they are different from what Mexicans are in Mexico. And that is a very important thing to understand. I don't have to sell you the idea, but I had some kind of examples, if you want, in terms of how these different cultures are interacting. Quick question: what is the largest minority group in San Francisco? Minority group in San Francisco? No, it is whites. So that tells you a lot about influencing. If you are a company and your target is a West Coast and you are not including multicultural, you're representing the white minority in the West Coast. In Los Angeles, actually, whites are already the second largest minority because Hispanics are the first. So big fact there. A couple of months ago, I was eating at a Bulgarian restaurant in Atlanta, and I saw that the following kind of my stereotypes, that the person that was serving looked very Hispanic to me. Yes, I was falling into stereotypes, I admit it. And I tend to like to speak in Spanish because I don't have to think too much, like when I have to speak in English. So I started to speak to her in Spanish, and she responded to me in Spanish too. So she knew Spanish, so I assumed she's Hispanic. But at some point, I noticed some accent in her. So I asked her where she was from, and she told me that she was Bulgarian. Her father was Bulgarian. She was born in the US, but her father was Bulgarian, and her mother was from Hungary. So nothing to do with Hispanics. And I asked her, and where did you learn Spanish? Oh, I live in Miami. I grew up in Miami. So you see how the influence how strong the influence can be. So this is one important fact. The other one, in terms of influencing across cultures, is what we talk a lot, Tanya especially talk a lot about in the morning, about multiracial families. And Peter also showed the statistics that this is one of the fastest growing groups, at the same level the Hispanics. Just a statistic. In what year will multiracial families become the majority of families with children in America? Nope. 2025. Just around the corner. In 2025, according to Nielsen, this is a Nielsen projection, more than half of the families with children in the US will be multiracial because of this multiracial marriage or people getting together. So this is huge because right now we talk about targeting African Americans or targeting Hispanics. What are we going to do when we are in front of multiracial families, where the dad is African American, the mother is Asian, and the kids are born in America? What race or ethnicity we prioritize? Is this an African American household, or is this an Asian household? What do we do? That is a very important. From what I have seen so far, we don't know much about this group, but to me, it's a segment, a very important segment that we should start paying attention to, because it is growing fast and can tell us a lot about these interchangeable aspects of the cultures that they live here together in Latin America, in the US. And to Tanya's point, in terms of being multiracial, most of us have some of that. For example, myself, I am also very multiracial. I am 50% Palestinian, 25% Spanish, and 25% unknown, because my grandfather never cared of asking his father where he was from, so I don't know where that party is. And by the way, I didn't know that I was Hispanic until I came here to the US. Before that, I was just a guy from Peru. So I didn't know that I was Hispanic. So that alone tells you about this diversity of races. It's not just one race, and we're going to talk about that a little more later. And while I understand it's not as we should expect at this point, we are also seeing some of the influence of ethnic segments in politics. We see that obviously we have Barack Obama, kind of the biggest example, but in Congress, in spite of all the fighting, how many members of the House are minority or ethnic? Huh? 83. Very few. It sounds like a number, sounds a lot, but I think it's a little less than 20% of the population, which is not a lot. If you think that ethnic segments, the population represents almost 40% already. So there is a long way to go there, but still that is growing. And I'm sure that it will grow as, for example, the bicultural, because right now in terms of voting, African Americans, most of them are native, so they can vote, but many Hispanics know. But as the bicultural segment continues to grow, I'm sure that these numbers are going to change fast. And hopefully that will start solving some of the issues that we have been discussing in the morning. So again, the point that I wanted to make here in this first fact is that ethnic segments don't live in silos, and that is a fact. Nobody can deny that. The problem is that we as marketers, as agencies, sometimes tend to live in silos. For example, you have the multicultural agencies that never talk to the general market agencies. Or even within a company, a client corporation, you have the multicultural department that almost never see the general market people in the same marketing department. So consumers are way ahead of us in this area. They already live together, but we don't as marketers. So we need a big change there. Okay? Second fact, ethnic consumers are different from the non-Hispanic white consumer. Everybody knows that. We have discussed about that a lot in the morning. But the fact is that ethnic consumers are not aliens from a distant planet. They have many things in common as well. The problem is that, again, as ethnic marketers, if you want, we tend to overemphasize the differences, and we oversight the similarities. And as marketers, we need to learn to know both, understand both the differences and the similarities, to see, for example, especially in this cross-cultural approach, see where we can leverage synergies, where they are similar so that we can do a cross-cultural campaign that would be relevant to everybody. Yes, you can always tweak the message, the communication itself, but if you are basing your insight in a basic human insight that is relevant to everybody, you can do very well. Some data behind this, for example. I'm sure you have heard about family being the most important thing for Hispanics, right? Everybody tells that. And here I know it's kind of difficult to ask this in a quantitative way, but we did an exercise a while back and asked Hispanics how important was family, friends, work, religion, all the way down to sex for them. And we asked them to rate it in a 10-point scale from not important at all to very important, 10. Here I'm showing the top box only, so people that said 10. And you can see, obviously, family is the most important thing for everybody. Then comes friendship, work, and we have a lot of liars there on the sex part. If you look at the data by gender, it changes a lot. But again, family is the most important thing for everybody. But guess what? Family is the most important thing for everybody, not only Hispanics. If you see a difference here between Hispanics and blacks versus the white population, it is just because Hispanics and blacks both tend to rate more positively anything in research. So there is no difference here. No significant statistical difference, if you want to be more technical. Where we do see difference is, for example, in work for Hispanics. It tends to be more important. They tend to value more work. That doesn't mean that whites don't care about work. It's just that for Hispanics it seems to be more important. And it makes sense, because if you see, look at the immigrant population, the main reason why most immigrants came to the US is in search for better opportunities, work opportunities. So obviously it's more important. And we see also for African Americans the importance of religion, how important it is. So in general, the values, the basic values, human values, are the same for every group. You see some differences, but we have liars in all ethnicities, not only Hispanics. So this is a very important fact as well. To really understand the ethnic segments in the general market, the so-called general market, we need to understand where they are similar and when they are different. Okay? Fact number 3, ethnic consumers are diverse. And we have talked a lot about this in the morning as well. But to me, this is very important, especially if we want to avoid the stereotyping. There is no Hispanic culture, like a monolithic Hispanic culture, like there is no African American monolithic culture. And for example, for Hispanics, at least now, we see that the companies acknowledge the differences or the diversity of the Hispanic market by acculturation. They see the acculturated, bicultural, and acculturated segment. So they acknowledge to some extent the diversity. But to me, acculturation, for example, is a double-edged sword too, because we tend to focus only on acculturation to understand the Hispanic market right now as marketers. And that can be tricky because acculturation, for example, assumes that all Spanish-dominant Hispanics are the same. And that is not true, for sure. If there, I'm from Peru. If there is one thing that unites Peruvians, Argentinians, Puerto Ricans, and all other non-Mexican Hispanics, is that they don't want to see them portrayed as Mexicans in advertising, as someone was saying in advertising in the conversation in the morning. So we tend to focus only in one variable to understand the diversity within the ethnic segments, and that's completely biased. Hispanics, African Americans, like the general market, are diverse by many different variables. It can be by gender, generation, origin, marital status, even in terms of sexual orientation, as we were discussing in the previous panel. Yes, you have Hispanic gays and African American gays too. It's not that, yes?
I was going to ask you your professional opinion. Why do you think, especially in the Hispanic market, there is this tendency to stereotype in such a way to the exclusion of all other Hispanic subgroups? Like, why is it that Mexican seems to be the default culture, if you will, when portraying Hispanics in media?
To me, it's basically a lack of knowledge, understanding of the market, and also in that specific point about Mexicans, because Mexicans are the majority, but they assume that they are all the same. But the solution to me is just go to the basics of marketing. The big problem with this type of biased approach is that we define upfront what variables we are going to segment the market by. In many cases, those variables are not the most relevant. In terms of country of origin, yes, we know that it is relevant for some areas, but in many other areas, it doesn't matter at all. So to me, it's basically a lack of understanding of the market. And on the other hand, it's also that I think we are at fault here because we have pushed for that with the growth of the multicultural agencies. And don't get me wrong on this, but when they were growing, kind of defending their position in the new marketplace, they kind of overemphasized that, and that's why it's like a pendulum. Like we were here when nobody recognized the Hispanic or multicultural segment at all. We went all the way to the other side. That we want to say everything is different. Now we have to go back to a safe middle, like be more balanced in our approach in general. Avoid the extremes if you want. So some data to look at the diversity. We know that acculturation is the most commonly used variable to understand Hispanic markets. We did, actually, as part of the research that we have done for this book, we did a lifestyle segmentation of the Hispanic market. We don't have time to go into detail through all these segments, but for example, we segmented the Hispanic market in 7 lifestyles or groups. Ambitious yuppies, comfortably constrained people, virtus, which are kind of the religious people, regular guys, different lifestyles. You have yuppie Hispanics, you have conservative Hispanics, you have collectivist Hispanics, you have individualist Hispanics, so many lifestyles, regardless of what language you speak. And interesting about this analysis is we did the same for the other groups as well, for blacks and for whites. And you can see yuppies, bappies, yuppies. This group, the faithful, you have the faithful in the whites, sister of the church, African American, virtuous in Hispanic, conservative, conservative, conservative. So this type of analysis, lifestyles, can give you much more insights to cross-cultural strategies, because like almost in any culture around the world, you have conservative people, you have modern people, you have liberal people, regardless of what race they are or what language they speak. So to me, this is the important thing of not just focusing on one variable to understand one market. There are many variables that play a role in defining Hispanics or defining African Americans. A little deeper on this, for example, here we have our lifestyles crossed by acculturation. You have an acculturated Hispanics, bicultural, and acculturated. Kind of what we have always heard in the industry is that, for example, that all unacculturated people, all the Spanish-dominant people are the same. That's the assumption of an acculturation model. And we can see here that that is not true. Within the unacculturated segment, you can have yuppies, you can have conservative people, you can have religious people, and so on. Okay? The fourth fact, and I think this is also very important, race and ethnicity are not always top of mind to consumers. Actually, very rarely it is top of mind to consumers. And we have done a lot of research on this, especially on the qual side. For example, we were doing focus groups for the book. And in an exercise before starting the group, when they were kind of gathering outside of the room, we asked them to complete an exercise. First, we asked them people from different ethnicities, all separate. We asked them to write 5 words or short sentences that would describe who they are as persons, as human beings. We did this with Hispanics, African Americans, Asians, Chinese specifically, and which one am I missing? And African Americans. None of the respondents, and we had quite a few, mentioned the race or ethnicity card at all in the open-ended exercise. No one said, I'm Hispanic or I'm African American. Never think about white. No white say, I'm white. That was in the open-ended. After they completed that, we did that in a closed-end or aided basis. So we provided them with a list of topics, like being a male, being gay, being young, being old, being conservative, being liberal, many demographic and attitudinal portraits. And within that list, it was a long list, we included the race part, Hispanic, African American. No white still mentioned white. I think one Hispanic mentioned Hispanic, and African Americans maybe 1 or 2 too. The group that mentioned it most was the Chinese segment. But when I say most, it was like 5 people of the maybe 20 or 30, I think, that we interviewed. So race is not top of mind. And we literally, when we commented about that in the groups, we literally got comments from consumers saying, for example, yeah, when I'm going to buy a car, it is not that I'm saying, okay, I'm a Hispanic, so I'm going to buy a car in this way. I am an African American, so I'm going to brush my teeth in this way. People just don't think like that. The problem is that we tend to force, as marketers, we tend to force that cultural aspect. And we're going to talk a little more about that later. And this is actually an example of, obviously this is not a picture of the guy, but this was one of the Hispanic guys in the focus groups. All of these variables were the ones that kind of define him as a consumer. And you can see Hispanic was just one little piece of who he is really. And that is very important because what we have seen is that when you force the cultural factor, you actually get a negative reaction from consumers. In situations like that, are when you can easily fall into stereotypes because you are forcing. As Marco was saying, not all Hispanics like soccer. I don't. And the final fact that I wanted to share before I go to kind of the implications, the more direct implication to our business, is that whites, non-Hispanic whites, are also part of the new mainstream. And we tend to forget this a lot in our day-to-day conversation. I think we forgot it to some extent in the conversation in the morning. And actually, whites are still the most prominent group in the new mainstream. Not only in terms of size of a population, but in terms of the influence. We always talk about how Hispanics or African Americans or Asians are influencing the so-called general market, the white culture. They are also influencing Hispanics and African Americans. Hispanics and African Americans also adopt a lot of the cultural traits of the so-called white population. So it is very important to keep this in mind, because they are, and they will be for a foreseeable future, still the most prominent segment in the population. And especially it's important because in many cases, whites are also part of this new multicultural mindset, if you want. As part of the segmentation that we did for white, the lifestyle, for example, out of the 6 segments, we segmented the white non-Hispanic group. We identified that 3 of those 6 segments would be considered multicultural segments. So people or segments that are more open to this idea of multicultural or living together with people of other races, that are more open, for example, to interracial marriage, that are much more open to diversity casting in advertising and things like that. So if you add this portion of the white segment that is multicultural mindset, you now already have a new majority that is multicultural. And that's why the reason why behind the title of the book, Marketing to the New Majority, because in that title, we are not only considering the traditional ethnic segments, but also the part of the white population that is also multicultural. And we tend to forget about them as well. And I had, we don't have the answer to this question right now, but one of the issues that we were discussing as we were working on this project was as the US becomes a majority-minority country and whites become another minority of the US, are they becoming more race conscious? Is there a real white culture in the country? We don't know the answer right now, but we are seeing, whether we like it or not, we are seeing some examples there. Some of that can be happening. Now it's limited to politics. We don't know what is going to happen in the future of the thing, but I think it's an important topic to keep in mind. Any questions so far? Are you awake?
Actually, I'm sorry to keep asking you questions.
No, it's perfect.
I'm just curious. It just seems that just with all that you've described here, especially on your 4th point, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between, say, the Hispanic in the Hispanic market versus the general market. So I'm curious as to why there's a divergence between marketing to the Hispanics versus marketing to the whites, especially since the Hispanic market, just based on your research, seems to be saying that, you know, their culture per se is only one segment of who they are, not the totality. Mm-hmm. So why is there the divergence between marketing to Hispanics versus marketing to whites, you know, or the general market, for lack of a better way of putting it?
We're going to get into that right now, but that key point to me on that is that we have to have a balanced approach. We should avoid the extremes, because they are different. Hispanics are different from a cultural perspective. They are different from the typical white consumer, if you want. But I mean, they are not alien. So we should avoid the extreme that says that everybody is the same, but we also should avoid the extreme that says that everybody is completely different. There is a balance, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. It's specific on this question, like how will this affect these facts and all the information that we have been discussing in the morning? How will this affect the traditional general market versus multicultural marketing paradigm? Basically, and actually somebody asked this question specifically, do we need targeted approaches to Hispanics when trying to reach to Hispanics or African Americans or Asian Americans? To better understand this, I think it's important to clarify that term, that what traditional ethnic marketing means or does. And obviously there might be some different opinions on this one, but in general, when we talk about ethnic marketing, we are talking about segmenting the population by race or ethnicity upfront. And obviously, based on that, we deliver communication or whatever strategy based on this segmentation by race or ethnicity. The basic assumption here is that race and ethnicity is a discriminating factor within the market or industry specifically. While in many cases it is, in many other cases it is not. So that's why I was saying that forcing the racial card can do more harm than good. In some cases, yes, race is important, and you have to address that. In, like, for example, and it can be in any industry. Right now, the typical industries that focus on this is CPG, financial, insurance, services in general, that typical industry that we see on this, retail. But really, you can do this in many other industries. Actually, in the book, one of the book chapters of the book is dedicated to multicultural experiences in other parts of the world. And for example, in Canada, we talked to how do you call it, funeral company, the cemeteries, that actually was doing a lot of targeted marketing to their customers, especially to the Asian population in Canada. So that tells you that you can really do targeted approaches almost in any industry when it is relevant. The point is that not that you have to go like in a, don't assume that race is going to be relevant for everybody at in every point, every situation in your marketing strategy. In some cases it is, in some cases it is not. So that's why we are one of the changes or shifts that we are proposing in the book in terms of the industry is that we should stop talking about ethnic targeting, because that kind of biases you to this idea of segmenting the market by ethnicity and then see how it works, to intelligent targeting. Think about it before doing it. And this is the basics of marketing. You segment the market. We are segmenting the market by ethnicity, assuming that that is the most important factor, and it's not always the case. So when we say intelligent targeting, kind of the definition that we are proposing is that it's a process used to determine what elements are most relevant to your target audience, whoever your target audience is at this point, including race or ethnicity. And obviously, this is our bias as research company. Research should inform you whether ethnic identity is a relevant variable in consumers' attitudes and behavior relative to your category or brand. In some cases it will be, in some cases it will not. And to your point, intelligent targeting, this idea of intelligent targeting, doesn't invalidate the role of ethnicity, because we know that it is important. It's just that you have to be prudent in how you use it. Actually, we do a lot of copy testing, for example, testing advertising, and our data shows that ethnic targeting actually tends to do better than non-targeted. Here we have about more than 700 ads in our database, ethnic ads in our database. Here I'm showing the Hispanic data, for example. What we did was divide the database in targeted advertising, so commercials that were specifically created for the Hispanic market, versus non-targeted advertising, so commercials that were created for the general market and, in this case, translated into Spanish to be aired in Spanish media. We divided the database in tertiles, top, middle, and low tertiles, so top performing, low performing ads. And we allocated how the ads will fall. And we did the same for African Americans. And here the data kind of proves the point that targeted tends to do better than non-targeted. You can see that in both Hispanics and blacks, targeted ads are more likely to fall in the top tertile, while non-targeted ads, in both cases, are more likely to fall in the lower tertile. So we know that targeted tends to do better, but it's a matter of being cautious in when you use that targeted part, and more importantly, maybe, how you use it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So targeted, we know that works tends to do better. But, and this is looking at the same data, it's kind of to your point again, targeted advertising doesn't guarantee success either. We have, in our database, we have a lot of examples of bad targeted ads. They had great cultural elements. They had the soccer game in the background, but they did very bad with consumers. So you have, for example, many targeted ads among both blacks and Hispanics that fell in the low tertile. And on the other hand, you can have several general market ads that did well among ethnic segments. Why? Because they were based on, I know, a basic human insight that was also relevant to these consumers. You see? An important factor here is that to understand is that basic advertising principles when it comes to advertising your business guys still apply to Hispanics and African Americans and Asians and any other group, any ethnic group. We are always asked what makes a Hispanic ad or a targeted ad successful. Our answer is it engages consumers, incorporates the brand well, it's easy to understand, and evokes the response that you wanted to evoke. This applies to every group, any group, here and across the world. The trick is that ethnic advertising does all of the above in a culturally relevant way. The problem that we see if you want from the outside of the industry is that we sometimes are so focused on this part, on being culturally relevant, on having the soccer game, that we forget all of the above. We see this a lot in the industry. And that's what I was talking about, forcing the cultural element being more harmful than helpful in many cases. So basic advertising principles still apply. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just to show you an example, we look at the most enjoyable ethnic targeted ads and the most enjoyable general market ads in our databases. And you can see, and these are the elements that help you boost enjoyment in general, in both cases. You can see humor, humor, music, music, celebrities, celebrities, family, family. While there's some difference, for example, I don't know what the general market people has with animals that Hispanics and Black don't care much about, but in general, you can see what works among the general market in terms of boosting enjoyment works also for the ethnic segments. The tricky part here is that if you're going to use humor, the thing is that if you're going to use humor for Hispanics or African Americans, or you're going to use music, you must make sure that that humor or that music is relevant to them from a cultural perspective. I mean, the basic advertising principle or the basic human insight is the same, but how you express that human insight in advertising can be tweaked to make it more relevant to the consumer. Ethnic flavor, I don't know what happened there, but it's this idea of adding the ethnic flavor. And I don't know what we have here, but I think it was, yeah, I had here this is an example from our database in terms of humor. I'm focusing on humor here. We look at the data, comparing in terms of enjoyment, ads with humor and ads not using humor. You can see that in general, humor works well among all segments. Ads with humor perform better than ads without humor across all ethnicities. The problem, the difference is the type of humor, for example, that you use and the intensity of humor that you use across the different segments. What we know, based on the research that we have done, is that, for example, Hispanics are much more open to humor than the other groups. This is a qualitative scale, if you want, in terms of the humor tolerance scale, whatever you wanted to call. Hispanics are the group that is much more open to humor. Then would come whites, African Americans, and Chinese. These are the four groups that we analyzed. The concept itself it's valid for all segments, but how you use the concept in the actual ads can be completely different. For example, Hispanics we know that are much more flexible. They are much more difficult to be offended by humor, and you can see that a lot in Latin America, for example. And there are many types of humor. One that we have seen works very well here in the US is this idea of making fun of the American guy. Sorry, but they like it a lot. And we have tons of examples of ads, Hispanic ads, that make fun of the, in a good sense of the making fun, but making fun of the American guy. But it can go in many other directions. Obviously, you have limitations, you know that you can do anything. You have blank check. But you can play much more. Actually, we have an example that is, I think, in the next one. Take a look at this one.
Dios.
God.
Nadie perdona, como perdona Nationwide.
The tagline says, "Nobody forgives as Nationwide does" at the end. So they are, to some extent, they are making fun of religion, the Catholic religion, and they are okay with that because even in that aspect, the religion that is supposed to be a serious matter for other groups, Hispanics are more flexible in how they manage their religion. It's not uncommon, for example, to see a Hispanic woman going to church in the morning and in the afternoon going to one of these palm readers to have the future. So that goes against the Catholic religion, but they are okay with that. So you can play more with that. We play this commercial with different groups, and some of them actually found it offensive because you are playing with their religion, especially with African Americans. While some like it, most of the consumers that they look at this didn't like it a lot. So you have to be careful. But the point here is that, again, the basic advertising principles apply, but you can play how you execute your creative can vary by group to make it more relevant to a specific culture. And that's the most tricky part in finding this balance, because I mean, if you see that it's a basic advertising, basic human insight that applies to everybody, why reinvent the wheel? One of the initial facts that we discussed was that they don't live in silos, they all interact. For example, in terms of media, we had a discussion before. We know that it's a fact also that Hispanics consume Univision, Telemundo, but they also watch ABC, CNN, and all these other general market media. The same with African Americans and the same with Asians. So, for example, if you are a brand and you are telling a story in general market and you are telling a completely different story in Spanish media, you can generate confusion in the mind of consumers. So you have to be careful. I'm not saying you have to do the same, but at least some sort of consistency between what you say in the two channels must be considered. And this is, again, the big difference between multicultural and international marketing. A good point that a big advantage that we have today is technology, internet, and we also discussed that in the previous panel. Having internet allows us to do much more surgical targeting, if you want, of the different groups, because in that, via that media, you can not only target Hispanics or blacks, you can target gay Hispanics that live in the East Coast and do it in a very effective way. So it provides you with much more tools to do this intelligent targeting that we are talking about. We also discussed a lot in the morning about the casting. And we have the data kind of proving that casting is not enough. And this is kind of an issue that we see also in the industry, that we tend to make it when we say targeted advertising, we immediately think about casting, having black casting in the ad or having Hispanic casting in the ad. This is from our African American database, for example. What we did, and this was kind of a subjective division that we did from our database, but we separated those ads that had black character, black casting, and some sort of cultural element. Whatever element it was, again, subjective division, but had something in addition to the black casting alone. And the other one is commercials that only had black casting as the cultural element. Those didn't have anything else other than the black casting. And we look at the enjoyment of these ads. You can see that 92% of the ads that had the black casting and something else were above the norm, while 85% of the ads that only had the black casting fell below the norm. Huge finding. Tells you that adding the casting, in this case blacks, in a commercial is not enough to be culturally relevant. And actually, this is an analysis from our own database. When we asked about this to consumers directly, we got the same responses in terms of the same findings. If there is something that consumers don't like, and no matter who they are, whether Hispanics, African Americans, whoever they are, it's a UN or United Colors of Benetton commercial, where they feel, they think that the company is kind of trying to fill some sort of ethnic quota in their ads. That they have to have 2 whites, 1 black, 1 Asian, and 1 Hispanic. They hate that. And they actually react negatively to that. They reject those type of advertisings because they see, again, the cultural factor being forced in the advertising. If they want to see an ad or cultural elements in advertising, they want those cultural elements to be natural, to flow naturally in the ad. Just because, I mean, going back to the soccer thing, just because you are targeting Hispanics, you don't need to put a soccer game in the background of the ad. We have a lot of examples that actually putting that soccer game actually hurt the ad rather than help it because it was completely distracting for consumers. In terms of where to introduce the ethnic insight, we have talked a little bit about this in the morning too. Right now, what we see in the industry is that most of the companies, what they do is they put the ethnic portion of the insight at the end of the process. This is kind of the typical marketing process, that you do research, you analyze the consumer needs, you develop a product, develop a positioning, and then generate a communication. Most of this process today in many companies is done with the white consumer in mind only. Once they finish, they come and say, okay, now how we adapt this to Hispanics, or how we adapt this to African Americans. And there is when the problems start, because they send that to the agency, and the agency doesn't know what to do. Because in many cases, the insight that generated all this campaign was not relevant at all for the Hispanic consumer, for example. So they have to tweak a lot of things and end up with a messy commercial that fails in market. So what we would like to see more and more in the industry, and we are seeing some sort of shift on this that I think is very good, is the ethnic insight has to come first, as some panelists were discussing in the morning. It has to come up front. And again, this is going to help you a lot in terms of the future, because if you incorporate the ethnic insight here, at the end, you might not need to even generate different campaigns for the different segments, because it is already incorporating the ethnic insight. So the last part was kind of, I know that different companies are in different stages in this process of adopting the new mainstream thinking. What we did as part of the book was a segmentation of the companies. We did a lot of interviews with companies at different levels, in the agency side, the corporate side, and we came up with a segmentation of the industry that I think kind of helps you first do an assessment, an internal assessment to see where we are, where you are, where your company is, and based on that, what you have to do or would need to do to get to the future of marketing that we are discussing about this new mainstream, new majority. We classify them as ignorers, includers, adapters, progressives, and leaders. I'm going to go quickly because the names are pretty straightforward. Ignorers are companies that basically don't acknowledge the existence of ethnic segments. I know that these are the few, but believe it or not, there are still this type of companies. Where we have seen this most commonly is, for example, in the luxury category. As we were discussing in the morning, the companies still believe that all Hispanics or all African Americans are low-income people that wouldn't be able to afford Mercedes or jewelry or things like that. They are wrong. There are a lot of people of color that have money, so they would be a great niche market for them. And just for that, look at the Asian market. They actually have more money than the whites, so big mistake there. And also we see that a lot of that in the pharma industry, in some pharma categories. Obviously, the recommendation here would be do research. And I know I'm biased here, but do research. Foundational research to understand the relationship that your category, your brand has with consumers, with certain consumers. You would be surprised to understand that, to know that. Includers, kind of as the name says it, they acknowledge the existence of multicultural segments, but are at the stage that they only engage to them via diverse casting. They assume that having, again, this UN commercial, having the black guy in the commercial is good enough for the black community. They are wrong, again. Here the assumption is that they think that there are no differences in consumers' behaviors and attitudes, and they see their product as a commodity. So why do anything different? Categories where we have seen this, technology, or for example, hardware, which kind of makes sense to some extent, but the problem is that this happens when because we tend to focus on the product specifications rather than on the end benefit of the product. I always say, for example, consumers don't need drills like to do holes on the wall. They need a hole, and they need a hole on the wall for some reason. The problem is that we focus on the technical specifications of the drill to sell the product, and we miss how they are going to be using. Another example on this category, on this area, for example, is the personal care in toothpaste. What of a science toothpaste has is just brush your teeth. Everybody brushes their teeth, so no science, no differences there. But if you kind of deep dive in that, you can see that there are differences in how they use it, and maybe more importantly, in the role of having a nice breath, for example. The end benefit. We have done research on this with the African American segment, especially the younger population, and we know that this idea of when you meet somebody, a new person, especially from the other sex, doing this breath check is kind of a point of entry to start talking to the other person. So that can be a big differentiating point between one culture and the other, and could generate a much more relevant strategy from a cultural perspective. So don't assume that your product or category is a commodity. It might be, but in many cases it might not. You'll be surprised. Do exploratory research. The adapters, I think, is maybe where most of the companies are right now in the industry. And especially we see that in the automotive, CPG, financial, not all automotive, not all CPG, of course, but this is kind of where we see this more. The characteristic of these adapters is that they are more engaged with ethnic consumers, but still use this traditional approach of ethnic marketing, where everybody is different. Hispanics are completely different, and you have to do everything different. African Americans are completely different, and you have to do everything different. This is, from what we have seen, and especially as we move to a more majority-minority society, this might not be valid in the future. So these companies are at risk. And importantly, here we are talking about the client side. this also applies to the agency side, because among agencies, we also see that the traditional ethnic agency is the agency that is, everything has to be different. So we have a lot of agencies in this area as well. The recommendation here would be consider each new opportunity as a blank slate. Don't assume that race, again, is the most important thing, or don't assume that race is important at all. Do research and find that out. If it is important, and you see that race is a differentiating factor, go for it. But if it is not, just focus on the other aspects of the consumer that are more relevant to this. For example, Mark was asked about the relationship between the gay community and ethnic segments. I'm sure that in many aspects, if you that being gay will be more important than being black or Hispanic or white. Because this is an important characteristic of the gay market, is that when you talk about gays, you are targeting a lifestyle where you have a decision. You opt for that lifestyle, while in the race or ethnicity, you don't necessarily opt for anything. You just, I was born Hispanic or I was born black. Where you follow that culture or not is your decision. But in the lifestyles, you already, in the gay market, for example, you already know that that person adopted consciously that type of lifestyles, if you want. And in a similar approach, for example, is one that I consider very important and kind of unexplored at this point, is the Muslim community, because we kind of presume that all Muslims are Arabs or from the Middle East, and that's not the case. You have Muslims from everywhere, but being Muslim is kind of a lifestyle that has implications on food, on things that you buy, and many other entertainment, and many other things. So it is a lifestyle, and would be more relevant maybe to target you because you are on the Muslim part of your life versus where you are black or white or whatever else. Progressives, as the name says, they already have well-established multicultural departments, and in that part they are kind of similar to the adapters. They know the ethnic segments very well, but a big difference to me between the progressive and the adapter is that the progressive knows the diversity within the ethnic segments, while the adapter still kind of stereotypes them as one monolithical group. And because they know that diversity, the progressives are more able to do these cross-cultural strategies. And that's why we put here that they are starting to test the waters of transcultural insights. But while in the way of thinking they are progressive, the problem that we see on the progressives is that the structure that they have within their companies is how do you say that? Is a barrier for them, because they are still structurally talking. They are a separate silo department within the organization. So while they have the knowledge and the willingness to expand to the new mainstream, how they are structured within their company is not allowing them to do that right now. So again, the recommendation here would be maintain your current direction in terms of the ethnic segments, and continue to push the envelope in terms of adopting this new majority strategy. We're going to talk a little more later in terms of how to do it. And finally, the leaders are the leaders. They are fully committed from the top down to the idea of new mainstream. The ethnic insight, the ethnic concept is integrated throughout the corporate culture. They acknowledge diversity within diversity, and they are pioneers in enlisting the aid of cross-cultural soft because they see that as a future. Industries that are more close or more in this area tend to be industries where ethnic segments actually over-index, obviously, as we were discussing in the morning, because they have they see the relevance of these segments much more closely. If they don't do it, they will be out of business. So that's why we put here food, beverage, beauty, entertainment. The recommendation here is keep going. You are on the right track. But importantly, in terms of the relationship with agencies, because many of these companies still work with a Hispanic agency, an African American agency, a general market agency, is make sure that all your partners are happy. And that means in terms of valuing their work, and also in terms of how they are rewarded for that. So the question here for you is where your company is. Whether it is on the agency side or the corporate side, we know that we are in some point in this spectrum. So where we are and what we need to do. We have had a lot of insights in the morning, the discussion in this morning, in terms of how we move to the right on this graph. Some rules that we have identified by talking to many people about this is that if there was one common denominator across all these companies, like for example McDonald's or General Mills, or these companies that are kind of in the leader part of the scale, if there is something that they have in common, is that the commitment came from the top. Having the multicultural marketing manager working alone won't make the change. And that has proven to be a kind of a failed approach. They can push so far only. They can don't do much. If the commitment doesn't come from the top, it is very difficult to really make this cultural change within an organization. So it is very important. And within that, this idea that as we were discussing in the morning also with Donna, is that more than ever today, diversity is the right business decision. It's not just a nice thing to do in the company. It is really the right business decision. And this applies, pay attention, this applies not only for the corporate side, because when we talk about diversity, we always talk about making this big corporation more diverse. To me, that applies also to the ethnic agencies. Because to me, in many cases, the ethnic agencies are less diverse than the general market corporation. I know many African American agencies or many Hispanic agencies that only have African American employees or only have Hispanic employees. That is not diversity. It's only one race or one ethnicity in the company. If you have only Hispanics or only African Americans in your agency, you will never really understand the new mainstream. You also have to be diverse. We were talking about this partner with agencies that embrace the new majority approach. This is similar to, we make the comparison here with a digital agency. In the past, it was the same. Because the general market agencies didn't have the capabilities, many digital shops started to come up to the industry in the past, several years ago. Right now, no corporation, nor client would work with a full service agency that doesn't understand digital. Or would work with a digital agency that doesn't go beyond that, digital. Apply the same approach to ethnic or multicultural marketing. You wouldn't work with a general market agency that doesn't understand multicultural, and you wouldn't work with a multicultural agency or ethnic agency that only knows this specific segment and doesn't understand how this segment is related to the general market or other groups. Apply the same approach. Do benchmark. Many companies are ahead on this, are doing, for example, I know that McDonald's, they are very happy to go to different companies and talk about their strategy, how things have been working for them. Do benchmark with your clients, especially because you are an agency, you work with different clients, you are in a very good position to do that, to invite, and obviously not with competitors, but do some benchmark with your clients. And finally, but for God's sake, don't rely on Jose, Keisha, or Jim for your ethnic strategy. This is, as someone said, in terms of hiring diversity, you must ensure that you hire. You should not hire. How does it go? Don't hire professional Hispanics. You should hire Hispanic professionals. You see? That's the point. We tend to rely that on that a lot. It's like you have a question about Hispanics, and you, hey, Jose, come. And you ask the question. And we see that a lot in the research, in the agency, in any type of industry. And we were discussing, I have always been asked about this idea of that you have to be Hispanic to do Hispanic research, or you have to be African American to do African American research. To me, that is again a double-edged sword, because yes, being Hispanic, for example, in myself, allows me to better understand the Hispanic market because I know it. When I see a React in a focus group, I see the Hispanic guy doing some gesture with their face, I get it because I know that. But the problem on the other side is that because I am Hispanic, I bring all my biases with me. And as we were discussing in the previous panel, we tend to make that mistake a lot. That we assume that all the consumers are like us, and that's not true. That's for sure. So don't call Jose for your strategy. So just the final thought that I had here was that, this summarizes everything. If you want to, after lunch, I know that you all may forgot all what we said, but if you want to remember something, it's this, that the general market and the ethnic marketing are not silo departments. And this applies to everything. Consumers are way ahead of this. They are all in this together, like the songs, like this teenager song goes. So that's why we are recommending, instead of having your general marketing here and your ethnic marketing on the other side, go for this idea of intelligent marketing. And it's all about balancing. Be smart in how you do your research. Don't assume that race is the most important thing. In many cases it is, and you will always be able to target your strategy, your approach to ethnic segments and make it more relevant to these groups, but don't force it. Just make it flow naturally. And to finalize, we always, when we talk about this idea of the new mainstream, we always tend to discuss two approaches, the melting pot and the salad bowl. Kind of the melting pot theory says that it's one extreme, saying that, yes, we are all in this together, and we all are the same. Kind of one of the extremes. They said that for the Italian segment in the past, for example, Italian, say Irish, and they are saying with the same with Hispanics, African Americans, that at some point we are all going to be the same because we are melting in this pot. On the other extreme, you have the salad bowl theory. These people that say that yes, in the multicultural society like the US, we are all in this together, we all live together, but we don't mix. No matter what happens, the lettuce will continue to be lettuce for forever. I think that both extremes can be wrong to some extent. So that's why we are proposing the chicken soup theory. In this case, what the analogy would be that the broth is the so-called general market, that this has been seasoned with distinct cultural influences over the years. After having the immigration of Italians, Irish, Germans, all these other groups that came in the past, the broth is what we have today as the general market. The other ingredients, the chicken, the noodles, the veggies, are the ethnic segments that kind of make the soup more substantial in texture. Immersing the broth, these other ingredients, the ethnic segment ingredients, have absorbed some of the properties of the broth. They have gained the flavor of the broth. But at the same time, they are adding their own respective flavors to the broth. So they are both influencing in the other group. And to me, that's the key, the most important factor maybe, because we tend to either go to one extreme or the other. And it's all about balancing and being in the safe middle, if you want. That's basically it, I think, yeah. Or if any questions, we have a few minutes, or you are so tired. And